Good morning. I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you to spend some time talking about you and your business. Father Robert Sirico, he's with a group called the Acton Institute, and that's ACTON, acton.org. One of the leading institutes, in my opinion, when it comes to understanding the importance of liberty from a philosophical and a moral perspective. People I don't think remember, and they certainly aren't taught in government schools today, that economics started as a moral philosophy. Actually, a few, in a formal sense, just a few hundred years before Adam Smith. It was developed a lot in the monasteries, in fact. And so I think we've lost a lot of our roots when it comes to understanding the foundations of freedom. And freedom works for everyone, particularly the poor. There's a lot of talk about how to help the poor. I want to get in that conversation as well. Father Sirico is going to help us do just that. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Kevin.
Glad to have you. First of all, give the audience a little bit of background about the Acton Institute.
Well, it was founded in 1990, grew out of my concern that a lot of religious leaders, pastors, clergy, theologians, didn't understand how a market economy worked. And you can understand why that's the case, because we get our money by passing baskets and redistributing the wealth, and that's fine. But if you think the whole world is ordered that way, then you really get into trouble. And so I began writing on the subject, and then decided that the best, most economical approach would be to help religious leaders, leveraged religious leaders of all denominations, come to an understanding of this and teach it themselves. And that's what we've been doing for almost 25 years.
Mm-hmm. And you said religious leaders. So is it mainly being done for pastors and for priests and that type of thing?
It's anyone who's involved and has influence in the religious communities. It could be broadcasters, it could be writers, it could be Sunday school teachers, missionaries, certainly seminarians and theologians and professors at religious colleges. But our goal is really to shift the kind of conversation that takes place with regard to markets, to business, to the economy, and move away from the notion that somehow making a profit is automatically sinful, without any consideration of, what is that profit being made from? How did that come about? And making a profit really is an indicator that you're accomplishing what you set out to do. It's an accounting category. And to just say that people who make profits are sinful is, frankly absurd.
Yeah.
It's easy not to make a profit.
There's a price to profit, right? And that price is progress. Economies that are built on a profit system are economies that are continuously progressing. They're growing. They're expanding. They're not only able to do things for the most affluent, they're able to do things for everyone. Exactly. America's poorest people are among the world's richest, and that's because of the fact that more than most countries, we have a heavily profit-oriented system.
Yes, and this is a thing we almost don't seem to understand intuitively. We always tend to think that there's a zero-sum game going on, that if somebody is benefiting, somebody else is paying the cost of that benefit. Now, that may happen. That certainly happens in a dark alley when somebody robs you of your money. But that's not what a market economy is. And there are different kinds of markets, too. There are different, you could market in human beings. It would still be a market, but it wouldn't be a moral market. I think that when we come to understand the economy more generally, we see that the fact that today people are richer overall throughout the world than our ancestors of 100 or 150 years ago, that this phenomenon can only be explained by the expansion of markets, by globalization, and not by even good charity, much less by government-to-government handouts and aid.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. And it's interesting. I'm assuming that part of the training that you do is the moral foundations of free markets.
Yes. Yeah,
because
we root
it
that
was a moral system first, and as long as there's
exactly.
free exchange and it's done in a voluntary and non-coercive way, it is fundamentally moral. Unlike the government's approach, which is to use might to coerce one group to give money to another group, which that's theft by any other definition.
Yeah, it's Robin Hood theology that people seem to endorse. But you're right. You alluded to it in the introduction when you said that the entire, I'll rephrase it in my language, the entire science of economics, if you want to call it that, really emerged from moral theology. It emerged from people, theologians, considering the obligation that human beings have to one another. And among the first considerations was the immorality of inflation. By the fact that monarchs would shave off part of a gold coin and then another gold coin, another one, until they could make another gold coin. But they would do that by diminishing the price of the gold coin that people had in their pockets, and that was really an insight of theologians. And they said this is immoral because people have the right to honest scales, and we still do it today. Governments that print money are doing the same thing as shaving off the edges of coins.
Yep, absolutely. I prefer to call inflation a monetary tax. The vast majority of people call inflation, because of how poorly people are taught. I mean, I believe people today are taught to be followers, not leaders. They're taught to be sheeple, not really adult people. They're taught to really not think or challenge the way thinking takes place. Critical thinking has been thrown aside. So because of that, when people hear inflation, they think high prices. But the reality is that inflation is a tax on money, on the value of money. Right. It isn't the taking away of your money; it's the taking away the value of your money.
Exactly. So that you have a $100 bill in your pocket, but it's not worth $100 anymore because it's not linked to anything that's objective and stable. It's linked to the whims of politicians and central banks. So here's where the moral part comes in, though. So we can have a prosperous society, but we end up amusing ourselves to death. We don't consider the moral basis of this society. Meanwhile, we enjoy all of the prosperous benefits of it, and then we give away our freedom inch by inch to politicians who will be just too happy to take it from us. And this is why I think it's important for us to have some kind of moral formation. I understand that people from different traditions are going to approach the question differently, but I think there's a basic, solid consensus that we can have just based on our reason, just based on the natural law, that people have the right to what they produce, to what they create. They have the right to the product of that there should be a rule of law that ensures that guarantees contracts that we make with one another. The sanctity of private property is something that is too little emphasized, even in religious circles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Too little. In fact, it's often discredited in religious circles, particularly the ones that get any credit by the mainstream media. Talk of private property is dismissed rather handedly. It's been replaced with social gospels and liberation theologies that are, I think, hostile to private property. And you mentioned rule of law. I remember going to an event in the early 90s that was in Washington, D.C., that was led by the Rockwell, the Rockwell crowd?
Yes.
And someone from your group, Lou Rockwell, asked a question to Steve Forbes. It's funny how the memory works. And he asked about, a republic versus democracy. And even in those circles, Father, the room chuckled that someone's still having that discussion. I was so happy that someone brought it up. But the reality is democracy has always been hostile to rule of law. And we're seeing how far it's gone just the last few decades. Don't you think?
Well, I think if we understand what we mean by democracy doesn't create law. Democracy is a procedural element. What creates law is the natural law, and then legislators who draft pieces of legislation based on a broader natural law. Democracy is only the way you get to it, and it can be a democracy, it can be a monarchy, it can be a mini government, or in our experiment in the United States, a republic has worked just fine. I like the decentralized notion of power. The Federalist Papers, the Constitution, went to great lengths to divide power, to not allow it to accumulate. Now it seems to all be accumulating in the political sphere.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a republic for any substantive way. We don't have a rule of law. From what I can tell, we have been replaced by a pretty crazy mobocracy, which was exactly what the founders warned us of. That's my opinion, and I articulate that.
Well, I mean, I agree. We're struggling with that right now. You know, the way courts seem to make law, the way what you call mobocracy, by politicians making promises to constituents that they would provide things that the Constitution does not make provision for, or take away rights that the Constitution quite clearly makes provision for. Just based
Well, I got to wrap it up. In fact, we went a little over, and I didn't even get to the conversation at hand, which means I need to get you back on. There's too much to talk about. But Father Sirico, he's at Acton, the Acton Institute, Acton, ACTON.org. I encourage you to check it out. Great friends of liberty, great friends of moral rule of law, and glad to have you on the program today, sir.
Great to be with you, Kevin. Thanks. God bless.
God bless you. When we come back, much more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at USDailyReview.com, and you're listening to The Price of Business.
Blinded by the light.